welcome back to another episode here. I've been on a bit of a hiatus lately. I've just been busy doing some stuff around my shed, working on some of my personal projects. I've also been doing some work for a bloke up the coast, putting some bikes together for him. So this episode, I'm going to go through and finally put this SmallCityCycles Panhead back together. So in the last episode, I went over this thing and we rebuilt most of the top end of this engine, but the heads needed some serious work done to them. So I gave these to a company and we had all the valves done, all the guides done. I had some welding to be done in one of them. It's cracked between the valve and the spark plug, super common. So I had to get that fixed up. But now these heads are ready to go back on this thing and get this thing running and riding again. So basically where we start on this thing, you can put the head together as a complete unit and then plonk it on your engine and tighten it up. So that's exactly what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go through, I'm going to rebuild all the rockers, I'm going to grind them again. I've shown you this before, but I'm going to show you again. Show you a little jig that I made to grind the rockers so you don't have any flats on them. I'm going to put this together, I'm going to put the tins on, I'm going to put everything on, tighten them all down, and then, like I said, plonk them on this, tighten them up, and let's get this thing started in this episode. I do need to wire this thing up completely, but I can twist some stuff together and make this thing run again. So let's get to these heads and whack them together. Alright, so basically what we're dealing with here, I have all the hardware here laid out for the heads here. Now, if you were sending your heads to go get machined and worked on, this is sort of how you want to send them. You want to take out all your studs for your rockers. I took out the studs for your center engine mount here, and I just gave them to them sort of as bare as I could. And the reason for that is, when they work on these things, for instance, all this stuff will get in the way. Like when they machine these heads, so when they deck this surface, they have to bolt it to these two surfaces here. That's the flat point. So this is parallel to this. So when they machine it, they have to bolt it to something like that and then machine this. So if they have to go through, muck around, taking all your studs out and everything, they're gonna charge you for all that time. So, and also, they might lose all this crap. You know, a lot of these nuts for these rocker arms are a special captive nut. So they have like a special little thing in them. So all of these except one are the wrong nuts. So these are just nylock nuts that have been machined down. Now, the captive nuts you get these days are pretty shitty anyway. So I'm just gonna go with these nylocks that have been machined down, and I'm just gonna use some Loctite and reuse them because, like I said, the new ones you get aren't that great anyway. So basically, before we get into our rockers and grinding this stuff like I was talking about, let's go through and put all our studs back in these heads and get them ready to accept our rockers. So before you put any threads back in, you always put them through your linisher and buff the threads. Get all the stuff out of the threads because you don't want to go through and put all that stuff into your head. So let's go through and buff all this stuff. Alright, so this is the time that you want to put your safety specs on. If you get one of these bits of wire in your eye, you're going to know about it. So we just want to go through all the threads on this and clean them all up, and then they are ready to go back in the heads. Alright, so I have all my studs here. We've buffed them and I've cleaned them with some thinners or something soluble to take all the oil and stuff off them, because we are going to Loctite them into the head. So like I said, on top of these rockers, I'm going to Loctite the nuts. So just to make sure every time we pull these rockers off, it doesn't take the shaft out with the nut on it, I'm going to use red on the bottom and then blue on the top nut. So the red's high strength and the blue's medium strength. So with any luck, when we crack the top nut, it's not going to pull the shaft out with it. So to put these in, this might be pretty explanatory for some people, but basically what you do to put these in, because obviously you don't want to put a vice grip or something around the shaft here and then spin it on and lock it, because you'll fuck this shaft here. So you just want to lock two nuts together. So I just found some random nuts here. You don't want to use the nuts that you're going to use for your rockers, because you'll round the edges and stuff tightening these against each other. So you just put them on like this, and then what you do is get two spanners and tighten them together, and then that will lock them to the shaft. So we just tighten that like that. So now this is locked to the shaft. So all we do, sorry, we're going to use red, aren't we? Everyone's probably like, oh, don't use the red, you'll get this stuck in there. But I'm not going to swing off this. I'm just going to put it in there nicely because I want the Loctite to do the work. So like that, and then we just get our spanner like this. So remember, there's two different threads on these too. So the coarse thread is what goes into the head, and then the fine thread is what the nut goes on. A coarse thread is better for a soft material like aluminium because there's more material between the threads and it's harder to pull it out. So that's why there's always a coarse thread going into aluminium. So we want to just put these all the way down until the thread stops like that. As I said, you don't want to swing off this because you want the Loctite to do the work. So basically we clean that off around there when we're done. And then all we do is take these nuts off like that, and that is one of our studs done. So I'm just going to go through, do both heads now, and then when we come back we can start looking at the rockers. So you don't need to watch me do this. This is a painful process. Alright, so I have all the studs in both my heads now. I put on this middle engine mount as well, so all this is done. I wiped up the excess Loctite because I'm going to put these on, and I don't want the Loctite underneath here because it will, you know, sit up and expand and do annoying stuff. So next I want to get to servicing these rockers. Now, you would have seen me do this in Ben's Panhead rebuild I did a while ago. But basically what you want to do with your rockers, firstly, we want to make sure that they've stayed in the same spot they were in when we pulled it apart. So marking this stuff is the best way to do that when you pull it apart. The second thing I want to do is just pull these apart, and they're obviously in three pieces. I just want to clean all the oil out of here because I just want to test it to see how much like float we have in this shaft. If this shaft and the bushes are flogged out, you're going to have a knock in this thing when you are riding it, or it's sitting there idling sort of thing. So we just want to clean this up, inspect this, make sure our shaft isn't picking up anywhere, make sure, you know, the top bit's brass, so that's the first bit to wear, but this all looks all right. So I've just cleaned all the oil out of it, and then I want to put it back together. Right there, so that is together. So this little thing I have here, this is my grinding device, but I can also use it for another purpose. I'll show you in a second how we grind it, but basically we put it in here upside down like that, and then I have 4 of these wing nuts, and they go on top, and they're going to act as if the nuts on here, when we tighten it on here, I just want to tighten this down pretty tight, and then I'm going to see what the shaft does inside of my rocker arm body. So this is, I just want to check this. So just want to move up and down, make sure there's no knock in it, back and forth. So that all feels nice. So there's no knock in this at all. So that's sweet. So the second thing is how we grind this. So when I talk about grinding it, we want to make this little foot here. So this is the foot that sits on the top of your valve here and pushes your valve open. So when this thing runs, it's doing that. So it's pushing on this round all the time. So when there's a lot of wear on this, you've got two notches, sort of where it sits and then where it stops, because it's there the most of the time. So you get like a ridge in it. So when you have a ridge in it, it sort of makes a knock. So that's another reason your top end might be knocking. So what we do with this, I have a little spring here, and the spring goes in the corner of my little jig here. I show you how to make this jig in my other episode too. So that just goes in the corner, and then the spring goes in here. I need to bend this is a different spring, but so basically when you push down on this with your grinding wheel in your pedestal drill, it will grind this and keep an even pressure on it. Now I'll show you the grinding wheel. So this is just the grinding wheel I use. It's just a bit of steel that I've welded a shaft to, then put it in the lathe and machine this, so it's perfectly true. And I just stuck a bit of sandpaper on the bottom. So what we do, we put this in our drill, and with our little spring here, this goes up and down like this while it's spinning and grinds the correct radius on our little arm here. So rather than keep talking about it, I'm gonna go through, I'm gonna check all of my shafts in these guys, and then we're gonna go through and I'm gonna show you how we are going to grind this in the drill. All right, so we're just over here at my humble little pedestal drill here. So basically what we want to do, get our lifter, put it back in this thing just like we had it. I'm going to put all of my little wing nuts on here. This is a super easy way to grind your rockers, and as I said, I just made this little jig here in my shed, and it was super simple and anyone can do it. So now this thing is all nice, my shaft is nice and free like that. I have my little spring here, that goes in there, and then it just sits in the arm like that. And then really all you do, you just set this up in the right spot. Leave that spring off for now, but you just set it up here in the right spot so that this is a nice little sort of throw like that. I might set this up, hopefully you guys can see this all right, but I want this arm pretty well square with the center. So I just got to make sure my silly little wing nut here doesn't hit it. One less wing nut is not going to hurt. So just like that, and then get my little clamp here, just clamp it down so I don't have to hold it, just like that, so it's flat. I just want it a bit further in. So once I got this set up, I can do two sides like this, because obviously they are opposite each other, these rockers. So I put my thing in like that. So I'm going to turn this on now. Oh, you did. Want to do this a couple times. Just have a look at my little surface. Still has a little bit on there, so I'll just go a little bit more. Check it out. A little bit more. This pad I have on here is a little bit blunt, so I'm not taking heaps. I've just done quite a few arms with it. And that is literally it. Let's undo this. So that is it ground. Let's see if we can get a close-up of this thing. See if it wants to do it. So you can see how nice and ground that is. As I said, it has the right radius and everything on now. So all I got to do is go through and do the rest of them now. But I'll show you a comparison between this ground one and a used one. So here is a comparison between a used one and the one I just ground. So this sort of has a bit of a ridge on it, and now this one is super smooth. So I just thought I'd show you. This is the radius I'm talking about. See how it's not flat? It's a radius. So because I bolted this down and used this in the jig, it's got the correct radius because that is the radius that this arm moves on. So as I said, I'm gonna go through and we're gonna ground all of them, and then we can start putting these heads together. All right, so I have all my rockers here, all ground now, so I've done all that. Make sure you give all this a really good clean before you go put this together, because you're gonna have all this, grinding material sitting around in here, and that is super abrasive, so you don't want that in your engine. So basically we're gonna go through now and whack all these rockers in. What I like to do is just put the bases on. So go through, easy tiger. Put the bases on, make sure they all go in how they should. Make sure they sit nicely in there. Just like that. The reason I put these bases in first is so that we can come through with some assembly lube. I just usually use like an oil stabilizer. Assembly lube can be super expensive, and this oil stabilizer does just the same job. It's basically just really thick oil that will stick around for a bit longer when you're waiting to get oil pressure up here. So a normal oil being super thin, a couple passes of this back and forth might shoot it all out, and then you have no oil sitting there, and that is when your engine will pick up and break something. So let's go through, put all these in. Like I said, plenty of this on there. Put a little bit on the top of your valves there too, where the arm sits that we just machined. And all that is super lubed up. So make sure you put these on the right direction. That's it. No, it's not. So there's a little oil hole here. See these oil holes in the front? And then in your little cup here, the top of your arm also has this oil gallery here. So just make sure that you put that in the right spot. Because if you don't, you won't have oil in the right spot. So make sure that goes there. Yep. All right, so the only other thing to worry about is our little oil directors here. So we spoke about this in the first episode, pulling this apart. These guys just catch a little bit of oil and then shoot them onto where your rocker foot is on top of your valve here. So these go on the high points. So your heads obviously sit like this. You want to put them on the highest points. So one there and one here. Sometimes these bend a bit when you do them up, so you just got to bend them back. Make sure they aren't hitting your arm as well. Sort of not what you want. So as I said, we're going to put some Loctite on the top of these. Nothing crazy, just a bit of blue so that it helps it out a bit. Because as I said, these aren't the correct nuts, so I just want to make sure none of this comes loose when it's running, because that will be very bad. Like I said, we put red on the bottom and then blue on the top so that these nuts won't pull the shafts out if we were to undo them, which is super annoying. So let's go through, put all these nuts on. All right, so I've just lightly seated all these nuts here. Just want to sort of move these oil directors a little bit. Now remember, this rocker will never come up. It'll only push the valve down. So you got to think about this on the 45-degree angle that these heads work on. Just want to make sure that that is dropping oil straight on to your rocker arm. So if you have a look at this one, it is a little bit off. So I'm just gonna, because this is only little thin steel, I'm just gonna move that a little bit, like that. So now it is gonna drop oil into the right spot. So we go through now and tighten up all these nuts to the correct torque. If you don't know what that is, have a look in your book. I'm not gonna spoon feed you everything, but let's go through, tighten all these up, and then we will come back and start putting all the pans and all that sort of stuff on. All right, so I have all my shit here to put the tins onto my heads here. Now, there's a few things that different people do when they put their tins on. A lot of people use the James style gasket kit. I always use a Kinetic because their gaskets are way better. Sure, the James ones might be how they were back in the day, but you have a look at a Kinetic gasket, they have a steel insert in them. So the James ones are just paper, right? So when you've had this thing on here for a million years, and then you go to take it off, you've got to scrape both sides because the paper gasket just tears apart. Where with a Kinetic, it has the steel insert, so you can pull the thing off in one piece. It's so much better. And unlike a paper gasket, these are super soft. They have like a really soft compound on them. They seal so much better. So if you're going through the effort to put this thing back together, you might as well put good seals in it. Like if you own one of these things, you have money, so why not do it the right way? So another thing that people do when they do their pan gaskets like this, they glue both sides because these things always leak. In Ben's assembly video, I didn't glue it and I wish I did. So I've done a few of these now, and you know, each one you do, you're always doing it a little bit different, a little bit better, always improving. So I'm gonna go through, and because the surface on the head is super nice, I'm gonna leave that, but because we have this small steel pressed piece here, I wanna glue this piece. So I'm gonna glue this so that basically we are gluing the tin to the gasket, and then the gasket is gonna seal fine underneath it anyway. So because this is a pressed steel piece, it's not gonna be as flat as a machine piece like this head is. But like I said, if you wanna just glue both, if you're worried about it leaking, maybe your surface on your head's not amazing, or maybe you're using James gaskets, just glue the whole thing. So basically when we put this on, I'm gonna glue this so that when the ring comes on, it gets a perfect seal all the way around. Now, I didn't clean these very well, so I'm gonna go through and clean these tins a little bit better, and then we'll come back and I will glue this. All right, so now that I've pulled my finger out and cleaned these a bit better, I'm just gonna get some gasket maker. This is like a Permatex brand. I definitely need to buy a new one. This thing is on its last legs. But I'm just gonna put a little bit around this. Like I said, if you're using James stuff, put it through the whole lot. It's not gonna hurt, it's gonna stop you from leaking a bit, but we just wanna go through and we're just gonna put a light layer on this. So just like that around the whole thing. And that is just gonna make sure that this tin that is not very flat is gonna get a good oil seal. Because like I said, there's nothing worse than just putting your engine together and it's leaking already, and you wish that you had done this stuff. All right, so now that I have a nice layer around this thing, make sure your gasket is good and lined up. Let's donk this on, just like that. Get our little D-ring, make sure you put it on the right way. And then with these little screws here, I'm gonna do a bit of medium strength Loctite. You don't have to use this as you want. I just like to put something on the threads, whether it is, you know, some anti-seize or just a little bit of this medium strength Loctite. Something on the threads is always good, just because you don't want it to corrode or rust or, you know, something happen to it. And these are only small guys, that's why I just want to use a bit of Loctite. So you want to make sure you start all these bolts before you tighten anything. That way you know the gasket's in the right spot. You're not trying to drive a bolt through the gasket. So I'm just going to run all these in just by hand, finger tight here. Like I said, I just want to make sure they're all started so that I'm not trying to start a bolt that is just hitting the gasket. Like I said, these Cometic gaskets are pretty damn good. They line up super nice. Alright, so I'm just going to go around and just nip it up a little bit. You just want to do a little bit at a time, because at the end of the day, it's only a little steel pressed tin. You want this to try and give this the best chance to seal. These are only tiny, tiny little bolts too, so 9 times out of 10 when you play with one of these heads, you know, these bolts are huge because they've been stripped so many times and people just keep tapping them out to the next size. So if you've got original small bolts like this, just a little bit of pressure. You can go in the book and work it out if you want, or you can just put a little bit on there like that. A couple of fingers on my quarter drive ratchet is all it needs. Alright, sweet. So the last thing you want to do, you just want to get some solvent that I've got here, and then go around and clean off all your excess glue so that it doesn't look like you've glued it. Why not go the extra mile and do it properly? So, I've done a pretty good job here. There's not heaps pissing out, so that's nice. Sweet. So that is one head done. So I'm going to go through repeat process on this, and then we can chuck these things on. Alright, so I have both here heads. They are both all bolted up, ready to go, ready to stick these on. The other reason I prefer this Cometic over James, Cometic runs this multi-layer steel head gasket. Now these are way better than the James gaskets. James just runs like the regular blue style gasket. Now these are heaps better. You get better clamping and everything in these. I find that these things never blow out. As long as you have heaps of pressure on your head bolts, you never have an issue with this type. So it's the other reason you go Cometic stuff. They also have your cork gaskets along with a rubber type instead if you want to go that direction. So I just bought like a top end kit. Obviously you can buy like a whole engine kit if you're going that direction, but top end is all I needed. So let's go ahead, go over to the bike and start slapping these on. All right, I am back here at the bike. I have the rear head here ready to go back on. I have my head gasket here. So this once again is a Cometic head gasket. I said it before, see how it is multi-layer. Really good head gasket this. If you ever played with cars and shit like I have, if you have a multi-layer head gasket, they're much better than just your normal fibrous steel inserted one. These are the go. So I have both my surfaces all clean. I just cleaned it with some thinners. So once again, whenever you put one of these gaskets on, make sure all your holes line up. So in these we have an oil feed and then an oil return. If they don't line up, you're gonna have some bad things happen. So make sure that shit lines up, put that on there like that. And then It doesn't really matter which head you start with. I always like to start with the rear head, just so you've got more room to get around it. It's already tricky with the rear oil bag and all the coil and stuff here, so why don't you make it easy and just do your rear head gasket first. So we just want to make sure we don't knock anything off when we put this on, which I already have. One of the layers caught. There it is. So I have my bolts here. These are all my head bolts. Now, if these things look a bit dicky, the threads aren't nice, or maybe the head's a bit rounded, just replace them. They're like 150 bucks in Australia for chrome ones like this to replace. Just replace them. You don't want this stuff getting stuck in your head. I saw a video the other day of someone that had one of these bolts stuck in their head, and they had their buddy holding the head up while they had a grinder in there cutting this thing. So you don't want that to happen to you. So like I said just before, I always like to put something on my threads. So obviously we're not gonna Loctite this stuff. So we are gonna use some anti-seize. So this is high temperature stuff. So obviously this engine's gonna get hot. The heat is not going to affect this stuff. So a little bit of anti-seize ensures that you're not going to have any corrosion, or this isn't going to bind up or anything silly like that. So let's go around and start all these bolts. Just got to find the holes. There it is. This can be quite time consuming sometimes. The bolts are not in an easy spot. So just like the bolts for the rocker boxes, you want to start all of these and make sure you sort of have them all coming down at the same point, so that you don't have any that are hitting the gasket or cross threading or something silly. So I'm just going to go around, put all these in, and then we'll come back around when we need to do the front head. Alright, so I have this head just sort of finger tight, so I can still knock the head like that. The reason I want to do that, I want to put both heads on before I nip them up. And the reason for that being is we're going to chuck the intake on here, and then we're going to line these flanges up for the intake as best as possible, and then tighten both heads up. The reason for that being, it has a terrible design intake to start with, so I want to give it the best chance of sealing up and not leaking, because an intake leak is the most annoying thing in the world. So I want to try and avoid that. So let's do the front cylinder now. Remember to make sure all your oil holes line up. If they don't line up, you're in trouble. You might as well not bother doing this. There she is. So I have my bolts all anti-seized up already, so they're good to go. Now the anti-seize I'm using for this is just called Mollytech. It's like nickel anti-seize lubricant. So it says the extreme temperature of up to 1500 degrees. So just for context, aluminium melts at like 630 degrees. So it's gonna be plenty good. It's not gonna, so a lot of the stuff you sometimes buy, it gets hot and then it like loses all its sort of viscosity, and then it gets really balled up and actually galls your threads up. So make sure it's a good high temp lubricant. So just like the rear head, I'm going to go through, put all these bolts in, and then when I've got it loose like the rear head, we will come in and line up this intake. Alright, so I have both heads on here. Both are loose, so I can still knock both around. And like I said, the reason for that is I want to take our intake here. You see this is just a normal intake O-ring style. So the early plumber blocker is screw in, which are terrible as well. and this is the O-ring style, like shovel's the same and all that sort of shit. So the reason we do this is because we can put that in there. We want to make sure this gap here is even. Sometimes this is a bit tighter, this is a little bit loose, but not much we can do about that. So what we can do, if I move it that way, you see this is not a great gap. So I want to move that back that way and then move this a little bit like that. So now this gap is even. I've got an even gap top to bottom and side to side. So now when I put my O-rings in here, this is going to sit evenly in here. So this is what we want to achieve. So I'm going to go through and just nip these up now so they can't move. And then I'm going to check this again, make sure it's right. And then I'm going to go through and tighten these up. All right, so I have both my heads here torqued down. When I say torqued, I mean absolutely swung off. Like in the book, it gives you some sort of torque measurement. I forget what it is now, but it isn't enough. You got to go through, re-torque it again, and then I've blown head gaskets a few times talking it to those specs. Talking to some old buddies of mine, they say absolutely swing off these. So I just do, I've got this little tiny 9/16 spanner that has been ground down here, so it's super thin because you got to fit it in there between the barrel and the bolt. And then I get a long spanner like this, stick it in there like that, and then give it a good whack like that. Doing it this way, you don't have to worry about coming through and re-torquing them later once you've heat cycled it and all that crap. This is set and forget. Just swing off them and they will be awesome forever. You'll never do a head gasket. So the next thing I've got to do here is put all my push rods in, all these guys. So what you want to make sure is you put these things in the right direction. So when I pulled this apart, I think one of them was around the wrong way. So the way you check, you just have a look at the size of your balls on the end of your push rods. So generally the big ones go up into your rockers and then the smaller ones go down into your lifters here. Easy way to check, just jam it in there like that. This bottom ball goes in there super nice, sits in there all the way. This top ball just sits on top. So I'm gonna go through now, let's whack all of these push rods in. Sometimes you gotta look, sometimes you have intake and exhaust push rods longer. So these push rods are all over the shop. I've got 3 the same and then 1 long one. Oh no, there's 2 long ones there. So your long ones go to your furthest away rocker. So obviously there to there is further from there to there. So you put a long one in there. This is on top load, so don't worry about that. And then this one from there to there is the longest, so you put the long one there. So I'm gonna go through and whack all these in, and then we'll come back and have a chat about how we are gonna set the adjustment on these push rods with this little adjustable lifter we have here. All right, so I've got most of my push rods in here. I just wanted to show you, when I put my push rods in, I like to put a little bit of grease just on the balls like that. Because, you know, these things might push like 50 times or something before this engine has oil there. So just putting a bit of grease there will make sure you don't do any damage to these guys or any of the bits in your engine. So now we come to the point where we have to set these, see if that fits. That's all right. Now comes a point where we've got to set the lash on these things. So we need to adjust these push rods, you know, they don't rattle around in here. So we need to adjust these push rods so that they sit on the base of the lobe and don't rattle and bounce, because that's when you're going to have issues with your engine, and that's when it's going to make a lot of noise. So I've just got a little camshaft here just for a bit of visual representation of what I'm talking. So when they talk about your lobes, so your base lobe is the bottom of the cam lobe here where the valve is not being pushed open. So these are the peaks, and that's when the valve's getting pushed open. That's when it's either pushing exhaust out or sucking fuel and air in. And this is the base. So this is the part where the valve's not doing anything. So this is where we want to set our push rods. So we want to set them so they're just riding on that. If they're not just riding on that, the push rod sort of floats with the lifter in here and makes a lot of noise. So the way we do that is we use our kicker. It's really easy with a kicker engine. With a starter motor engine, it's a little bit hard. We just want to turn this over and watch our push rods. So when we turn it over, we see this push rod is being pushed open. So that's our exhaust push rod is pushing our exhaust valve open. So that means our intake valve is doing nothing. So this is when we adjust our intake valve. So this is when we want to adjust our intake valve. Now if we keep going, I can show you what's happening here. So now we are on intake stroke. So as soon as you see your intake lifter, this guy, opening, you want to be adjusting your exhaust and vice versa. Sometimes you can get this thing on compression stroke, so that's when it's firing and both valves will be shut. You can do both at the same time, but I like to check them individually, and then once I've had them set, turn the engine over a few times and keep checking them. So basically all we do, like I said, the intake valve's opening now, so we just adjust the exhaust here. So, alright, so I just changed my little holder uppers here. These are just bits of TIG wire that I've bent up and they hold your tubes out of the way. It can be super annoying sometimes. So all we want to do, we've wound this upright so that the adjustment is tight so that we can't move the push rod. So now we just want to take our bottom nut here and take it all the way to the bottom where you lock it up. So I like to put a little bit of pressure on there and lock it up and then fiddle with the adjustment, just so when you tighten this thing, it changes the adjustment. So if you're close to being tight already, when you change the adjustment and then tighten it, it's only going to change it a fraction. So very important, your adjustment, otherwise your motor will make a lot of noise and potentially you could hurt something. So if you're not confident in doing it, probably don't do it, especially on an expensive engine like this. So what we want to do, we want to be able to spin this push rod with our fingers. So we just give that a little bit less. See, I can just spin it with my fingers there, a little bit less. See, I can just spin it with my fingers there. So that's the sort of adjustment that I want. So now put this annoying thing back on. Usually this is a bit easier with different heads. So now we want to go in and put a bit more pressure on that, tighten it up a bit more, and then we check it. So I can't move it now. So I just need to give that a little bit of a move. See, now I can move it easily. So I want a bit less than that. So we hold this, just give it a little tweak. It's very touchy. So I can just spin that now. That's what you want. So now to check it, we just want to turn the engine over, go past. So that's compression, you hear it. So now that exhaust valve's opening, closing, wait for that intake valve to open. Didn't move because of the grease. There it is. So now we check this again. See how it's gotten a bit lighter? Everything's starting to sort of compress a bit. So we just need to adjust this again. So we put a bit more tension on it. Still light. Now it's tight, so we go back a little bit. A bit more. Loose. A little bit more tension. Just tight. That's how you want it. So it's getting loose a bit again, so I'm going to give it, I really need to make a better holder. Paperclip with a rubber band is really good. I just don't have any rubber bands. So that's a bit tight. Let's go back a little bit. Still a bit tight. So you want to take your time with these because, like I said, these are super important. Alright, so that's just turning now. Every time we adjust it, we check it. So exhaust intake. Yep, just turn it. So that's one of our push rods done. So I'm gonna go through, do the rest of these, and then we can go on to the next thing. All right, so I've done all the push rods, and now I want to go through and put the carburetor on. So this is the manifold for the carburetor. Remember, the small side's up before I link it. We want to put this in here, right? And we've got to get these seals between here. Now, I've seen a lot of people struggle with this when there's a super simple solution. So, you know, you're trying to get that in there, and then that one's fucking up, and you can't get this one in here, and I'm going to show you a little trick here, and you can tell your buddies that you came up with it. So you just knock that over there like that, knock that guy over the top of your manifold like that, and then you put your manifold in, and then all you do is flick it back over. Flick it, done. Look at that. You're welcome. That'll save you a lot of dicking around. So all you gotta do now is just put your little clamps on and you're done. I usually just undo that, stick him around, depending on which way you want your bolts to face. I think I want mine to face down. So I'll just try and shoot that up in there, just like that. Don't worry if your manifold moves, should be right. So that guy there like that. Where's my other one? Leave that up like that. So I want both facing down. Let's try and make this look nice. The rest of the motor looks pretty good, so I sort of want to keep that going. So I've just started them like that. Push this guy back to where we want it. Now you don't want to tighten this up until you've got the carburetor on there and in the right spot. So I'm just going to leave that guy like that. And we'll go around the other side and start putting this carburetor on. All right, so let's whack this big dumb carburetor on. So this is a Linkit M74B. So obviously she lives in there like that. We have a bottom carburetor support, so you have to run one of these, otherwise this thing will just keep moving your clamps back there and you will get an intake leak. So make sure you got that guy on. I haven't had this on in a while, just got to remember which way it goes, like that. And you also want to run one of these. So what this guy does, this is just a little spacer for your carburetor, and this takes the heat away. So if you were to just bolt this straight to your flange here, you'll get a lot of heat transfer and your carburetor will heat up, and that will cause, you know, your fuel in the bowl to boil, or, you know, it's just not gonna run right. So you wanna make sure you've got that on there, because that stops the heat transfer. So let's do a bit of mucking around here, see if I can get this thing started. So this flange needs to go up a little bit. That's why we leave it loose, so we can fuck around with it a bit. Push this through, there we go. All right, now just put the rest of these bolts in. All right, so that is the carburetor on there. Now all I gotta do, I've just gotta whack my center engine mount on, and then off that has the little bracket that holds the sheath for the accelerator cable, and a few other bits and pieces, and then I will come through and I reckon we'll start putting the exhaust on, start getting this thing ready to fire up, I reckon. Alright, so I'm just putting some oil in this thing, just about ready to start it up. You might notice that this thing has suddenly got wiring. I just filmed a wiring video, completely rewiring this thing, so if that's something you're interested in, I'm going to post that video after this video, so full rewire video coming up. I also filmed a video how I fixed the wet sumping issue on this bike, so another video to look forward to. But basically, just got to fill this thing up with oil, get it off this bench, and then start it up. I just fixed a couple annoying little issues it had. So pretty well good to go now. So you want to make sure you're on compression stroke. Easiest way to do that, pop your spark plugs out, and we're just going to turn this thing over. You just want to watch your push rods. So at the moment we've got an intake valve coming seated. So that means after the intake is compression stroke. So it's on the correct stroke. Let's go around the other side and have a look at the bung. From memory, this thing was super annoying to put on my little bike bench here because it's so freaking low. So I might have to jack this stupid thing up to get the blocks out of it, just so I can get it off here. We'll see. I'm gonna guess the front brakes do absolutely nothing, and I would be correct. So, yep, there's the frame hitting. Stupid thing. It's just sliding down the frame at this point. Oh yeah, that's about to come off. Sick. Right. We come away with a win. I fixed the stand, which was not doing stand stuff, so that's good. Also fixed the clutch, which wasn't doing clutch stuff. You always forget how small this bike is until you put it on the ground. It is stupid small. Feels like a little postie bike. Alright, so now is the time to see if this thing starts. So remember to always have yourself your torch or your phone handy or whatever, because when this thing starts running, we're going to look in the oil bag and see if we can see the oil returning. Then we know that this thing's oil pressure, it's, you know, the pump's working, it's doing the stuff it should. So I haven't tried this thing yet, so you might see me kick my guts out for a while here, but these linkets like a lot of fuel. So if you turn the choke on, kick it a few times. Alright, so choke off, I can definitely smell the fuel. Choke off. Key on, just the ignition like that. Holy hell, that was loud. I don't know why that was, but it seems to want to run. Doing the right things. Alright, so let's do choke on again. Key off. Couple of primes. Alright, choke off, key on. Once do. Alright, choke again. Fuel's on. I don't know how old this fuel is either. It's been sitting here a while. Alright, let's get compression there. Choke off, key on. I'm going to try an Ollie trick. Ollie reckons half choke. I've never done it before. Alright, so let's go half choke. See what happens. No. Doesn't like half choke. Alright, I need a breather. Ugh. Alright, so I worked out what this thing likes. It likes a bit of accelerator. As you can hear, it is hating that. So I'm just going to take a bit more timing out of it and see what it sounds like. Alright, so I made a little change. Let's see if people liked it. As you can hear, it definitely liked that timing change. I'm just going to have to ride this thing, see what it really likes. I'll probably change it a little bit more, but for the time being, that is pretty well it. You've probably heard the whole way through this video, it has been pissing down at my place, so there's no way that I'm going to be taking this thing for a ride. So that's pretty well it for this video. You will see on the next video, I am going to do a full wiring on this bike. I did it in between this video. So there'll be a full wiring video on this bike, and I also fixed a wet sumping issue on this bike. So that video is coming out as well pretty shortly. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.